Let's talk a little bit about gold and silver and how the government changed things in regard to ownership. Now, when the Great Depression hit, it was legal to own gold and silver, but Franklin Roosevelt changed that. What did he do, and why do you think he did it?
In the middle of the Depression, this is a year after he became president, he closed the banks down because they were failing because of the Depression and economic conditions. Borrowed money is what triggered the Depression, overextension, overspending, and it came tumbling down. And so to complicate the matter, they took real money out of circulation and replaced it with paper. It brought major change to the stability of the American dollar.
Was that what actually caused the Depression? Was people completely losing faith in our economic system and running on the banks? What was the actual cause of us?
My understanding is when the stock market crashed on October 29th, 1929, October 31st, whatever the date was, the stock market during the 20s after World War I, there was a world recession after World War I. Europe was devastated. They were destroyed. Their economies were all in a wreck because of the battles that were fought. Cities were wiped out. People were not there to go back to work because they'd been killed. Millions of people, even in World War I. So all the economies of the world were in turmoil. And then the United States was a little bit isolated simply because we didn't have the battles take place on our soil.
We were also only in World War I for the last couple of years
That's
of
right.
the war.
Yes,
whereas
we were.
Europe was completely decimated.
That's right. They started way before 1914. They had already had problems with inflation and devaluation simply because of economic conditions that led up to World War I. The 20s, things were booming in America because we had geared up to create war material. Industries had been converted over to production of war material after the war. That went for most of the 20s, the roaring 20s as history identifies it.
So by the early 30s, America's in this awful depression.
That's right.
Had been in the depression for 3 or 4 years.
Right.
Roosevelt comes into office, and he all of a sudden announces Americans can no longer own, was it gold or gold and silver?
Well,
I mean, you could have a wedding ring and jewelry, but you weren't allowed to own large clumps of precious metals. Am I correct on that?
this is the executive order. I'm reading it.
Okay.
Okay, under executive order of the President, issued April the 5th, 1933, all persons are required to deliver on or before May 1st, 1933, all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates, paper, now owned by them to a Federal Reserve Bank branch or agency or to any member bank of the Federal Reserve System. Executive order. Then it lists out all the stipulations that that executive order covered. It's too small, I can't read it from here, but it says on there, if that gold and silver is to be made for your business, then you don't have to turn it in. If it's deemed having more value than its face value, you don't have to turn it in. All of a sudden, I think John D. Rockefeller and Henry Ford said, my $20 gold piece is collectible. I'm not turning it in. And they didn't get in trouble. That's why there's still so much gold and silver available in the marketplace today, because they made a rule, but then they made rules to get around the rule. So even though he took it out of circulation, he didn't confiscate it. People didn't have any gold and silver because it was the Depression. They didn't turn it in because you can't turn in what you don't turn in, that you don't have.
So this went on that you couldn't have gold. You couldn't own gold other than jewelry or those special loopholes
Requirement,
that you
loopholes.
mentioned.
Yeah.
This went on for decades until what, the
1974, Gerald Ford, after Nixon took us off of the gold standard, he signed the executive order or the law or whatever that made gold and silver now a commodity, not money. Which, what that did to the market is it made gold and silver an investment or a bullion item versus just strictly money.
So it put it in the same category with like platinum and other precious metals, right?
Yeah, well, platinum was viewed. There was a few trial strikes of platinum back when they were trying to figure out how to make coins. They never were. We never had any circulating money made out of platinum or palladium. Those were all metals used for industrial purposes. They were still considered a precious metal, but after 1974, they became a commodity. In my understanding of what that law encompassed, that it allowed us now to go and buy and sell gold and silver as a investment or a commodity versus before it was just money.
So this happened in 74 after Nixon resigns. Ford says it's going to be okay. I'm going to sign this executive order and you can have gold again. Silver was never off the table then, it was always just gold?
Well, we stayed on the silver was in circulation. Our money was backed up by silver until 1964, and they replaced all the silver, dimes, quarters, and halves that were in circulation, and there was zillions of dollars face value made out of silver. After 1964, they phased it out and replaced it with strictly Federal Reserve notes. The 1957 silver certificate, 1957 series silver certificate was the last one made for circulation that was backed up by silver, theoretically. After 1964, up until 1964, you could take that silver certificate, $1 or $5 or $10, and walk into a bank and they would give you 10 silver dollars or whatever the exchange was, whatever the denomination was, you could get at face value. When that law was enacted, they had so much time to redeem that money, that paper, for silver. But it didn't take very long for the banks to run out of silver because the Federal Reserve or the Treasury was not shipping money to the banks anymore, money being gold and silver, or in 1964 it would have only been silver. So they weren't shipping money to the banks anymore, so what they had in reserves or in inventory was paid out to all those people who stood in line to redeem those silver certificates.
It's 1974, Gerald Ford, the president at the time, says, okay, everybody, you can own gold again. And so a couple of years later, Texican Rare Coin comes into existence. And as the name implies, Texican Rare Coin, maybe that was the specialty in the beginning, but I think what we see now with most of us those of us who are into collecting, a lot of the coins, for instance, when I come into your store and I purchase silver, it's not a U.S. Mint coin. It's strictly 1 troy ounce of silver. I'm actually collecting the precious metal itself. Or if I buy gold, it's the same thing. I might buy a gold coin, but usually the coins are going to be worth more than the ounce of gold itself. Explain the difference between owning a gold or silver coin and owning a stamped out piece of silver or gold.